Oh, well, there we go.
Okay, that's what we're ready. Hello and welcome to the tail end of the web conference for 2019. My name is Tom Simonite. I am a senior writer with Wired, based here in San Francisco, and I'm happy and pleased to be here for a conversation reflecting on 30 years of the web. Hopefully we'll also talk about the present and the future as well. I have three talented and eloquent panelists here to do most of the work. I'm going to briefly introduce them to you right now. So on the end here we have Aidan Katz. He is a project lead on artificial intelligence at the World Economic Forum, and he has previously served as executive director of Yale's Information Society project. We have Jamie Tevan. She is chief scientist for Microsoft's Devices and Experiences Group, and a veteran researcher in human-computer interaction and information retrieval. And Robert Caillot on my right here, forgive me if I've mispronounced your name there. He previously worked at CERN and tells me he's now retired. While he was at CERN, he played an integral and key role in bringing the web into existence. And I believe he also organized the first web conference in 1994. Is that right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Okay. We have about 45 minutes to talk amongst ourselves up here, and then we will have 50 minutes for questions from the floor. Before we get started, the organizers asked me for one additional piece of housekeeping. That is some definitions. So I'm sure that no one in this room has ever done this, but apparently many people treat the words internet and web as interchangeable. And so I was asked to give some brief definitions. Here we go. The internet is a global system of interconnected networks. The web is the space of hyperlinked documents and content that can be accessed over the internet. I looked that up on the web earlier. Hope I got it right.
On the internet.
Okay, so we're here to talk about 30 years of the web. It seems to make sense to start at the beginning. And so I'm going to turn to you, Robert. 30 years ago, we did have the internet already. But you at CERN and someone you worked with, Tim Berners-Lee, that wasn't quite enough. You saw there was a potential for something else.
That's right.
How did this get started?
Well, these things were all in the air for a long time. And you said I briefly worked at CERN. Actually, I worked at CERN for 34 years. But and I had two careers inside CERN before that, mostly to do with human-machine interaction and also with documentation and handling of documents and so forth. And so there were several people who had set up hypertexts. They were well known by that time. I had some idea of trying to get through two documents at CERN over our internal network, and in parallel, Tim, in an office a kilometer from mine, was writing a proposal which does not mention the words World Wide Web and does not mention the words Large Hadron Collider either, to access documents using the internet, which we had just about made available in CERN at that time. So it was sort of, the whole thing happened, my best analogy is you take a pot of overheated fluid and you drop a seed in it, and suddenly it starts boiling. And it starts boiling because all the energy was already there. It needed this single seed to make it explode. And the web succeeded because of the nature of the URL, I think, the way that was constructed. That was a great insight. And it also succeeded because it was the hypertext with the least functionality. You know, it was the least functionality, and it was defective in that it permitted broken links. These two elements allowed it to scale up, whereas all the other hypertexts couldn't do that. And so I think that's what was the success behind that. So whether this was now greatly positive or greatly negative, you know, that remains to be seen historically, but that's how it happened.
Right, and we'll get to the positives and negatives as we continue the conversation, I'm sure. In the beginning, who were the first? So maybe you and Tim weren't exactly the first and only two, but when that version, that idea of the web started to spread, who did it sort of captivate first?
No,
Presumably
we were the first.
It was just you.
Yeah,
okay.
there was nobody else, and we each had access to a student for help, so that wasn't very much either. And how shall I say this concisely? Read it in the books. But we were sort of allowed to work on it because it was part of the evaluation of a software development system that we might perhaps use for software development for the Large Hadron Collider, which was still at that time at least, about 20 years in the future. So yes, and then there were a number of people out there who understood what we had because they had been doing very, very similar things, and who started picking this up and putting in bits and pieces of it, and I hired some more people, and in the end, but it took a long time. Huh? It took a very, very long time compared to how fast the railways spread or how fast aviation spread. If you compare it with those technologies, the web technology took 10 times longer.
Right.
Because you could just download the thing, and it was a no-brainer to start, but it took time.
Okay, Jamie, what was your first experience with the web? Can you?
Yeah.
No one has to date themselves in this panel, by the way.
So actually, it's kind of fun. Actually, I don't know how many people here remember their first experience with the web. You know, any of you who's under 30 probably don't remember this. My first experience was when I was in college as an undergraduate, and I remember, being in this basement of a computer science lab in the, sort of in the dungeon of the engineering building at the school I was at. And this guy called me over and he's like, Jamie, you have to see this. And he pulled up the Lynx browser and showed me a web page. And I don't know, it was some dumb, it was some gov page or something. And you had to tab between each of the links and hit return to go to anything. It was pretty much a pain in the butt. I thought it was really dumb. Sorry.
No, you're right.
I failed to, I failed to see.
Was that a
The
common
line
reaction?
mode browser was the worst mistake we made, okay? But it was the only thing that was portable.
Yeah. No, and clearly, I shouldn't be chief scientist at Microsoft because I often think things are dumb that end up being pretty cool. I thought Twitter was really dumb, too. Yeah, so that was my first experience. Since then we had graphical browsers were a huge improvement.
Sorry, they were the first ones.
Were they? Okay,
Yeah.
My first experience was with a text-based browser.
Yeah, I know.
So
that's why I
interesting.
said it was the biggest mistake we made, but yeah.
It's kind of Adam, what was your first experience? Can you remember? I didn't notice if you had your hand up. Forgive me.
No, but I remember maybe not the first time ever on the web, but the first time it was noticeable. I was also in college. My class was the first class for everyone to have an email address, and so that I guess sort of dates me. But I found this website. There was this book I was looking for. I was a philosophy major and was far from being in the basement of the engineering department. But I found this website. You may have heard of it. It's called Amazon. And they were selling books. I was telling my friends that this book that I was trying to find on an obscure philosopher that wasn't in the local bookshop was available through this great website, and it could be delivered to my door. And they told me this would never catch on. You have to actually go to a bookstore to look through in order to choose your books. I disagreed, and later on bought stock in Amazon, which I sold too early, but that's another matter.
Okay. And so, Robert, in '94, you organized the first. It was called the Web Conference at the time. Is that the same name? Or?
No, well, let me tell you the story in perhaps a few sentences. By '93, it was clear that the Hypertext Conference has changed its attitude, and about 80% of the talks there were based on the web. So I felt it was high time to bring together all the developers who had never met each other. I mean, there's a bunch of geeks out there. Sorry, out there. And so I thought I have to do this, and Tim was fairly much against it. But I went ahead anyway. I got the go-ahead from our director, and said, okay, so I'll launch a call for papers, which was just about in time. That went out in December '93, so I had about 4 months to get to the 24th of May. So in next week, it will be indeed exactly 25 years since the first web conference. And then, of course, I had to refuse a large number of people because the CERN auditorium held only 400 people. And then we had the second one, and so on and so forth.
Right.
And we built up the thing. And I wish to take the opportunity also to say thank you to all the people who, over those 25 years, worked hard on the organizing committees and found all the venues and made it all happen and made it work. And it is actually almost amazing to me that 25 years later, it's still running.
Right.
So
it seems very healthy. What was that first community like? Who were the people that showed up?
Very much like it still is, I think. It was technical developers and okay, there's a lot more social aspects now than there were before. The earliest ones were, of course, really technological. But yes, it was very much the same kind of crowd with the same spirit, I think, yeah.
Okay. Was anyone in the audience here at that first one in '94? Two, I think. Okay. And so very quickly, this new thing that started to spread beyond CERN, beyond the first sort of academic communities, and just really took off. Jamie, you worked on the commercial side of the web pretty early on, is that right? What happened? Why did it catch on?
Yeah. So I guess I was saying I thought the web was dumb, and the thing that sort of changed my perspective of that were search engines and sort of that ability to search and find content, and then all of a sudden it became really magical. So I went in the late 90s to go work at InfoSeek, which was one of the very first search engines, and I think actually that search engines tell a really interesting story when you think of the history of the web as well. You know, the way search engines worked used to be very different. So one of the main ways that people found information actually back in the 90s was via Yahoo. And Yahoo wasn't even sort of a traditional keyword search engine the way we think of search now. It was actually static web pages that editors manually created. And the web was pretty small at that time. I think in 1994, there were 27,000 websites in total. Only about 14.
That many?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So actually, I have some random statistics from 1994,
Okay.
just because there were
Didn't think it was
27,000 websites. About 14% of those websites were .com. The rest were mostly .edu and .gov. There were 16 million users of the web at that time, too, which is a reasonable number, but when you think of it, there's probably more people typing like the letter E into a search box on the internet this second than were using the web in total at that time. And so I was super excited about search. I went to InfoSeek. I worked there for a little bit. And actually, InfoSeek's kind of interesting, too. Like, we hadn't figured out the business model for monetizing web content at that time either. Like, I don't know that we've figured it out yet. But InfoSeek at the time was charging for searches. And then we sort of moved on to, I mean, like, just do you remember the internet? I mean, the web, sorry, vocabulary. Do you remember the web at that time? Do you remember all the little under the construction signs on web pages? You know, when we started figuring out how to start using advertising to fund web content, we used big banner ads that would like sit and blink at the top of the page. You know, it took us a long time to figure out how to match advertising to people's intent and do ad auctions and that sort of thing. And I think we're still trying to, you know, hopefully we still have some evolution left to go in how we're monetizing content. So anyway, Yahoo had all these manually created pages where if you wanted to search for dogs, you'd enter the word dogs, and this manually created page would come up that somebody had gone and collected all the best dog content and put that forward. And this notion of these directory pages was actually so prevalent in thinking about search that while at InfoSeek, I remember sitting down with the World Wide Web proceedings from like 1997 and reading through it and figuring out about like, oh, links are interesting and what that means, and being like, okay, great, we can use the link structure of the web to recreate these directory pages. And so that's what I was using, link structure. I wasn't thinking about using it for ranking. I was using it to create automatically generated directory pages instead of manually created ones. We were starting to see keyword search emerge, but I think Lycos had 54,000 pages in total in their index. So you can see why it was actually possible to manually curate all of the content on the web. But I think search engines are fundamentally important, not because of sort of this ability to find information or index content. It's actually, there's another really interesting thing that search engines sort of brought about for us. It's kind of spawned a transition that we're still in the middle of, and that's the fact that search engines capture people's behavior, and that's pretty different than any of the other software that was being used at the time. In 1994, I think WebCrawler was the most popular search engine, and they got maybe 15,000 queries a day, which is obviously a tiny number. When you think of the number of search queries that search engines see now, we probably see 10 times as many queries in a second as WebCrawler was seeing in a day back in 1994. But the important thing is we've actually figured out how to use that data to improve the service. And it's that ability to see people's behavior at scale in real time and feed that back into the systems that we're building that's really been transformative in pretty much everything that we do. And I think so.
Yeah, right. And it brings some complications as well, which we should probably get to at some point. What you said about search being so important is interesting. I mean, it feels like there was a point when search sort of started to work and the web was so large that it really changed the way people thought about knowledge and seeking information. And that sort of just became a big driver for what happened to the web. Aidan, do you have any thoughts on that? You know, how did it change how people think about knowledge?
Absolutely. So I decided before starting law school to work at a startup in New York, and it was an interior design and agricultural site, and architectural site, and I was using search engines to deal with clients who were looking for information, and I learned a lot about search engines when I was looking for someone needed stool, and so I put in stool and got unexpected results for my search because I was looking for a chair, and started using Alta Vista and learning some Boolean terms to sift out the incorrect knowledge. But it was definitely extremely useful. I was also simultaneously finding there was a really good T1 connection there. So being able to download stuff on my hotline server was another thing I discovered about the web, and file transfers of public domain knowledge in addition to copyrighted works that also floated around there. So it was all very new and exciting, and I do mention public domain works because in line with the book theme, it was incredible to be able to just within minutes get most of the classics in history onto my computer. Downloading, and when you say adding to knowledge, it was truly magnificent of a feeling to feel like I could have, all of Shakespeare within a minute if I got to the right server.
Yeah, I think that's a common feeling, isn't it? There's this ideal of having all human knowledge at your fingertips, which came to sort of stick to the web pretty early on, right? Robert, was that your idea from the start? I mean, it sounded like in the beginning you were quite focused on documents, like particular tasks, and wanting to connect them together.
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, one of the very first things that were happening was, by the way, the first search engine was at the University of Geneva in 92, I think. I'm not sure.
What was it called?
It didn't have a name.
Oh, okay.
Why would you?
That's why I haven't heard of it, I guess.
Well, yeah, but it was there. But the I got off track now.
Oh, sorry. I was asking about this idea, making all human knowledge available.
So one of the first things that we did was set up this virtual library thing, which was sort of an index of links to sites that might have knowledge that you were looking for. Mm-hmm. It was sort of like an encyclopedia of links to different sites, and I think it's still around. No, yeah. But it never really became popular. The idea was that the most knowledgeable people in the field would be responsible for some of those links to sites with that information. So, but it never really took off. I think that people are now just relying on this blind, dumb, brute force Google, right?
Right.
Which.
But the motivation, people feel like everything is out there. I mean, Jamie, I guess this is a theme that the information retrieval community sort of mapped over time, right? People expect that the answer is out there somewhere if they can just find out the right query or get connected to the right piece of the web. It's on there. Right?
Yeah. It's ridiculous what my kids expect to be able. They'll be like, "Mom, for Halloween, I want to be a blue dinosaur with a red tail and wings," and I'm like, "Just go find it."
Okay.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah.
And you alluded to this, Jamie, when you talked about behavioral data and how that sort of created new ways of running a company or a product. Yeah. The web also became extremely commercial, right? That's been a big part of it. What has that brought us, or like? How has that evolved? I mean, I guess, Aidan, you mentioned before you'd done work on kind of the legal aspects of that. But there was a whole new way to deliver products, services, have relationships with customers.
Yeah, in fact, it was along the same lines with the search that I discovered this commercial aspect, having just started law school then. I had learned to make web pages and had done meta tags and all that, and then suddenly I learned in my first year of law school about trademark law and how putting some terms in your at the top of the HTML page as meta tags could be considered a trademark violation. And so there were all these new issues that came up from this brief moment where everything seemed to be open and free, where the law was from the offline world was catching up to some of the new dynamics that were occurring on the web.
Right. Okay. And that kind of catching up process has continued. At the same time, there was new sort of business innovation that was open up. Jamie, can you say a bit more about that from your experience? I mean, how did things evolve from those sort of early InfoSeek days when it sounded like everyone was trying to figure out what to do, and then the industry kind of got going and realized that the data was maybe the key to it. things got more sophisticated.
They certainly did, and this is a conversation, like I said, that I think we're in the middle. Basically, 25 years, like we're halfway through a major societal transformation that the web, we've got the first 30 years, first 25, 30 years, and we've got another 25, 30 years till we figure this shit out. And we figured out, like, and this is just me sort of extrapolating, but like we figured out how to create these feedback loops right now using data, which has been super useful in many ways, in that we have feedback loops where we can make search better, we can make an experience better. But these feedback loops are driven by engagement, and right now our business models that we have set up are monetizing engagement rather than monetizing the success of the people who are sort of engaged in the tools, in these loops. And I think we need to be we're starting to move, as it becomes possible, like it's just gotten so much more sophisticated, the things that we can do on the web. You use anything you want to do. Like it's not just visiting content. It's highly interactive. It's creating content. It's communicating. All of this stuff happens through the web, through web content now, and certainly figuring out rich contextual advertising models was a huge enabler to many applications. It did enable search to work well. It did. We need to be figuring out how we're monetizing, successfully in a way that helps us create tools that are useful for people. A richer array of services that are driven by the success of the people who are using them.
Right. And yeah, Aidan.
And I also, in line with, for me, a lot of it was realizing the intersection between law and the internet, and the contrast and the tension between the openness of the access to the information and the closedness of the business models came pretty quick. So my first summer internship was at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and I got to work on the 2600 case, which was the DVD encryption case. Jan Johansson cracked the DVD CSS and distributed it through the 2600 magazine, and then it got linked to everywhere. And so all of a sudden there was this unstoppable bit of knowledge that was being spread everywhere, and a business model that was about locking down content and fortifying it with a new law that had just passed, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. I was just learning about copyright and already skipping to para-copyright and circumvention rules. And so one thing that was immediately noticeable to me was this strong tension and the difficult fit between what the laws and rules used to look like and the dynamics of how information was shared in this new open space.
Right. And Robert, when did you realize that, did you think from the beginning that the web was going to have a commercial sort of aspect to it?
No.
No, okay.
No, of course not, no.
Right.
No, it was not meant for that.
Right.
Neither was the internet meant for what it is used for today. It's essentially totally defective, and so is the web and all these other things. Yeah, right. I mean, the whole business model of using advertising is totally defective. So we have to review all that completely.
Right. No. So was there a point when do you remember at the point when it became clear that the commercial side of the web was here to stay? I mean, it was pretty early that became established.
Yeah, but I was never really deeply interested in that. It was sort of a side effect more than anything else.
Okay.
A negative side effect.
Right. Okay.
Bad side effect.
Well, and you mentioned advertising. So in our email discussion before the panel, you mentioned that you have a proposal for a new way forward. Could you outline what that is?
I think we should ban all advertising everywhere. But you can only do that if at the same time you introduce true micropayments, which after 30 years we still haven't got. But they were there. I mean, there are several systems of micropayments that have successfully been used in the past. The first one to start with is just the stamp you put on a letter before you put it in the post office box. So these systems can be implemented, they can exist, and then you can get rid of subscriptions, of locking in things, of a whole load of other stuff, and you can get rid of all the advertising as well.
Okay.
I think, but it's, well, I mean, you'll contradict me. I think advertising is just plain horrible. Okay?
Right. Okay. But, I mean, you described
wherever it is.
You described it as defective. It has been, it's been very successful by lots of other measures as well, and supports many services that people use. But it does seem in recent years that there's been more attention on these questions about where the data goes and comes from and ends up. Right. What do you think the big questions are there, Aidan? This is something that I know you've thought about.
Well, in particular, one project that I'm working on now at the World Economic Forum is called Generation AI, about kids and their use of the internet, their intersection with AI, whether it be robotic toys when they're younger that integrate AI, or social media when they're older. And this question of the behavioral advertising takes on an added concern when it comes to children who don't have the legal capacity to consent to their information being taken, and also are in early formative years. I have a daughter who's 10 and can really be shaped by the way that the services can orient towards the kind of information that comes before and after, and what's collected, and how expressive you are in regards to these sites and what's collected. So I think that with the interconnectedness of so many of the devices, Internet of Things, and the ability for machines to be processing information about people without layers and steps of knowledge, consent, transparency, explainability, et cetera, is very distressing in regards to the advertising model, and I think has only been heightened, and we've seen over the last couple of years the way that people feel manipulated in their search for knowledge when the commercial aspects are integrated too finely into their interactions.
Right, and a lot of that springs from, individuals struggle to think intuitively about these systems, right? They're so large, a lot of them are invisible. Jamie, I know you've done work on, I think, is it attention and technology, right? So you thought about what do we know about people's sort of mental models of technology and maybe the web or these type of systems?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about our kids not being able to handle sort of the manipulation. Like, I can't handle the manipulation of the feedback loops.
Right.
Like, we are shockingly bad at managing our attention. And one of the things that I think is kind of cool that's become apparent in recent years is this realization, and we're kind of realizing it in a scary way, but I think there's an opportunity too, like, about how much the tools we use influence the decisions we make, and influence our priorities, and influence what we get done, a kind of a fun fact that I think is sort of interesting, that sort of highlights some of the challenges here, is, did you know that people notice their phone is missing before they notice their wallet is missing? And I certainly, I feel that. I don't have my phone up here. It's in my bag. I can feel it missing. And, even more interestingly, people notice their phone is missing before they notice their kid is missing. And that's funny, but, that's true for me. And my kids are loud, We've got these feedback loops going that
Feed forward.
What? Feed forward. Yes. So we've got these loops of it's not like our phones were designed to be attention-getting devices. They were designed to be this access, they're connecting us to information and people that are in other locations. But somehow along the way, these loops have each drawn our attention, and it becomes something that attracts us to us. And so I do think it becomes really important that we start thinking about the influence that the tools have on what we choose to do, on how we get things done, But it doesn't mean that this is inherently bad. It's just that we need to make sure we have the right mechanisms in place and the right ways to use those successfully. If my tools can understand what I want to get done and are, drive me towards my priorities, I can attend to the things I want. I can get what I want done. I can care about the things that I care about, even in a better way than I would naturally. And that's like a cool opportunity. We just have to figure it out without all moving into the matrix first,
Right, and so although we're not quite into the matrix yet, I mean, the tools that are, the web-related tools that are in widespread use today are very sophisticated, and often, they're plugged into very big systems. But does some of the original sort of handcrafted individual web still exist? There's concern about how much activity now happens inside big platforms, which may be built on the web but are effectively walled gardens. Do we still have something of? Is it still possible to go out there and use the web and be an individual and not have to use some of these big systems?
And not have to, what was the last?
Or not have to use a product from a giant corporation and play by their rules. I guess you can still hand code HTML and a browser will read it.
Yeah, but and I think the general purpose computer being persistent, even with mobile devices and Internet of Things devices, is always a sign of hopefulness for the open-endedness of the system and for the people who are interested to continue to use it as that general purpose tool. But I think the majority of us don't, and are filtered through. You mentioned the personal aspect of the web. I wanted to describe the flip side of this Generation AI project that I'm describing. I mentioned the concerns about privacy, but in terms of being able to deliver precision education to people with learning disabilities and other aspects of the way that they interact with others that are not the mainstream normalized ones, is a wonderful development in terms of that personal relationship, and actually opens up worlds of knowledge to a lot of kids by paying attention to their differences. And so I think, with all of our concerns, there's also a lot of promise and hope.
Right. Yeah. Well, so we have a few minutes before we go to questions. So, speaking of promise and hope, maybe we could talk a bit about the future. Jamie, what do you think are the interesting questions to ask about where the web goes next from here?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think, kind of coming back to this behavioral data, I think that increasingly, the ability to capture large-scale data is really driving a lot of this AI revolution that we're in the middle of right now. And I do think we need to be figuring out how to understand that data and how to not be involved in implicit trades with that data, and how to credit people with the content they create and track and value that. So that's a big one. I think there's really interesting things happening with the connections between people, and where we're moving with that. And we're seeing certainly an increase in freelance work and platform-mediated work that's taking place enabled by the web. And I'm really fascinated to see where that's going. The web also does create, having a shared way to access content and access communications is interesting. And I think we're starting to see even the web browser not being the only lens that we have into web content, and thinking about what does that look like, from our mobile device? What does it look like to have web content within what you might think of as a traditional desktop application? And then even start thinking about what is it with different kinds of browsers? What does a speaker look like in accessing web content, and sort of new form factors?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, so we've had 30 years of the web. Next summer it'll be 10 years since the web died, according to the cover of Wired magazine. It was August 2010. the argument there was that activity on sort of walled garden type platforms and video and apps are detracting from the open web. Does that argument, is that still something we should be thinking about, do you think? Is the web become a little bit diminished by some of these more closed things?
Well, I mean, I guess you started with the definition of the web, and it probably just depends on how you define it. And so, like, I personally take a fairly expansive viewpoint towards it, and you know, what is the web only web content viewed through a web browser? Is it, you know, but like video, that's awesome. Like these are it's so weird. My kids, all they do is watch YouTube. Like it's fascinating, and like they want to learn how to do something. I go look up a tutorial. They go watch a video. It's a, you know, this is new stuff that's pretty cool.
Right. It doesn't have to be text documents with links inside it. Robert, your long colleague Tim has, over the last few years, has sort of made this argument in public that the web has taken a bit of a wrong turn. You know, he's among the community of people working on sort of decentralized ways of sharing data or content. Do you share his view on the trajectory that the web has taken?
It's a difficult question because I don't really understand where he's trying to go. I'm not trying to go anywhere at the moment with web stuff because I think we have actually at the moment two problems that are far, far bigger than anything we're discussing here, and that is global warming and planetary overpopulation. And we've got to solve those now. And everything else is subject to that. I mean, so I don't really care. Really not.
Okay. Hey Dan, I don't know whether you experiments with any of these decentralized platforms or looked at those.
I have, and I think it is an important tension, especially in regards to the prominence of walled gardens and the ability to the creative destruction of being able to constantly reinvent. I would actually say that in terms of our concern and what we're looking towards in the future, the future of the web, the future of technology is hopefully more human, I would say. And I think that it's very heartening, even earlier today at this conference, and a lot of extraordinary efforts that are happening everywhere to infuse ethics into online interactions and the web. And I think that's something that we should pay a lot of attention to. I remember when peer-to-peer, I started realizing with the combination of my philosophy background and that my concern was where was the face-to-face at the end-to-end of peer-to-peer was my question then. And I think that we're closer now to taking that seriously and to appreciating the humanness of our communication and information interactions and hoping that we pay more attention to that part.
Yeah, okay. So we now have some time for questions from the audience. I'll ask one more quick question, but if you would like to ask a question to the panel, please walk up to one of the microphones here. We're here talking about 30 years of the web. In another 30 years, we'll all look younger because of anti-aging technology will have advanced so much. San Francisco may be underwater, but will we still be able to talk about the web? Like, do we think it's still going to be something you can point to and say that's it, that's the web?
I mean, he has this
Robert, I don't know, what do you think?
I mean,
we're stuck with it.
It's a question that is totally disconnected from the state of the planet. Just completely disconnected. I mean, it has no sense. Your question makes no sense. You cannot predict that. If San Francisco is underwater, it means everywhere else the world is totally disrupted. You can't talk about forget it. I mean, your question makes no sense. I'm sorry.
Okay, it's an answer.
It's an answer. That's for sure.
Jamie, do you have a more upbeat view, or are you?
Well, assuming we're alive and the climate wars haven't started. You know.
Go on.
Will we be able to talk about the web still? Most certainly, but again, like I said, I think that our notion of what the web means is evolving, and, we've got the, intranets, and, it's almost all. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have a particular.
It sounds like you agree.
Answer,
My question makes no sense.
I actually like your question. And I'm going to take it. I'm going to take web to mean not only however we defined it as a certain internet protocol, but as a structure, as the kind of decentralized nodes that are connected, and it may not be exactly the same in terms of web pages that you go to, or everyone coming to your MySpace page or to your TikTok videos, but everything from your in-person meetups and how they're organized, and the way that you can organize politically, and the way that niche interests in a wide range of things are enabled to connect people. I think the web, we will still be able to talk about it as decentralized clusters of connections between people. And so I think that'll persist, and I find that to be a very promising aspect of enabling freedom, to prepare for, being underwater or other
Right,
challenges.
Yeah, maybe it's one of our tools of survival. Thank you for humoring the question. Okay, we have some questions over here.
I'll try to make this quick. There were two books in my career that made a huge impact. One was in 1996, Creating Killer Websites by David Siegel, which essentially said throw everything out the window and do whatever you have to do to make something look good. And it made everything inaccessible, slow, all sorts of stuff. And in 2001, Jeffrey Zeldman did Designing with Web Standards, which said, let's go back to the W3C. Let's go back to standards, accessibility, and you could say influence the people that made JavaScript the language it is today. So I'm wondering, what are some of the flashpoints that you saw over the last 30 years and some of the unintended or intended consequences, particularly if it had an impact on you?
Okay. Well, Robert, were there any sort of key innovations in the early years? I guess there was maybe the original sort of specifications that were drawn up.
Sorry? Original specifications?
Yeah.
You're dreaming. There were never any original specifications. They came much later.
Oh, that's interesting.
And one of the gaping holes we left was not defining a programming language, which means we ended up with this most horrible thing of ever invented programming language is called JavaScript. I mean, it's a monster. It's an aberration. But we needed it. So we've got it now. Well, we've got 6 or 7 other ones. I think if I can see any good thing that happened, that is that it took 20 years, but we've got most browsers now adhering to the W3C standards. Right. We've got a working SVG, we've got a working scripting language, we've got a working DOM access and all that sort of stuff. So the technology seems to have sort of converged rather than dissipated in the wild. So that is the good thing that I can see, and that has taken a long, long time. I also believe that one of the miracles, perhaps, of the web is that the Wikipedia has not failed. It's still there, it still works, it's still a static website, but it's still there and it works. And
in some parts of the world, yeah.
Yeah, it grows and it's okay. So so those are the positive things that I can mention. I have to mention a few positive things.
Yeah. I appreciate the balance.
Right.
A question on the right-hand side.
I was just wondering if the panelists have any idea about if and maybe how the web can help in solving these two bigger problems that we have.
Well, I must say, if I can take the microphone here, I must say that I thought very early on that it was going to be potentially the tool that might save us. But that was also 20 years ago. So, 20 years have elapsed since then, and we have done essentially nothing. I mean, it's all there, the knowledge is all there, and people have done zero, zilch, right? In fact, worse than that. So, yeah, it's now become an emergency. It's beginning to be recognized as an emergency. And the web, of course, is there to help. So I hope it will be used as a tool as such. I wish to point out that I do not consider all these gigantic social sites such as Facebook and the others, to me, they're not part of the web, right? They are gigantic walled gardens, you said, that have been enabled by the web, but they're not the web. So I don't want to touch on their role, but their role can also be positive, of course, yes.
Aidan, you've worked at EFF, which I think is an organization that's shown how the web can help communities form that would not form otherwise, and make their voices heard too.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of promise, even on a problem as urgent and troubling as climate change. I think the structure of communication, enabling, for example, the reporting on climate conditions as they develop more immediately from the perspective not of top-down weather kind of sites, but from individuals reporting on their own surroundings, is a promising development in enabling fighting back. And I think that the ability for the spread of the web, the fact that we have more likely chance to hear from the people who are most affected and earlier on by climate change in places that are generally underrepresented is another important aspect to our knowledge gathering. We can become aware of the dangers rather than them being remote and far away. They can be immediate and up close because of the bottom up as opposed to top down nature.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so some highlights. A question on this side.
Hey, so I'm interested in hearing panel's thoughts a little bit more.
Can you lean into the mic, because I can't hear you very well.
So I want to hear panel's thoughts a little bit more on monetization models. I think you guys have already alluded to, for example, subscription-based or micropayment-based monetization, or even like advertising-based. It isn't clear to me like if there is like a clear path forward. For example, you've already discussed like problems with advertising-based model. It's creepy, it's intrusive. And even if we, I think, somehow are able to fix the online advertising model, people are now getting used to ad blockers. I don't know if you can convince them to turn off their ad blockers, even if you fix some of the underlying issues. Another problem I see, for example, with micropayments is I've heard people say that if you make websites only accessible in return for some micropayment, only the rich will be able to access it. And we lose the open, free nature of the web if we go to pure micropayment-based models. So how do you kind of like bring these tensions together? Is there like one monetization model? Is there a hybrid we are working towards? Thank you.
So I think that we maybe, like, the auction model for advertising, for example, was a new way of approaching advertising. I think that we probably haven't discovered the correct model, and that there's interesting research there. One of the things that is very interesting does have to do with the value of the data that people produce. And if we can figure out how to make that more explicit of a transaction versus a sort of implicit transaction, that becomes interesting, particularly because it starts engaging people in the process of taking ownership of the data they produce as well. You think about the ways that people participate in Wikipedia or in other kinds of things where they're actively producing valuable content. If instead of just having data exhaust, like the queries I issue or the links I click being part of the data that I produce, if I am actively involved in that process, it becomes kind of interesting. And we see some of that too in the gig work as well. That's people actively engaged in creating content. So I think if we can start thinking about how we make explicit the value of our data and make that trade more explicit. So that's a business model we don't have at all and haven't fleshed out and don't understand, and I don't know the answer to it. But I just think that there are interesting opportunities that are not just what we've already thought of ahead of us.
Plenty of space for experimentation,
Yeah.
right? On this side.
Hi. Thank you, Robert, for your great remarks. And I want to follow up on the previous question that was asked on this side. What is the role of web? What do you think is the role of the web in making the overall society realize that global warming, for instance, is a big problem? But I want to also point out that is it only, so because typically we focus on the web and on the role of social media, but isn't the problem lying somewhere else? That essentially, currently we don't have systems for to expose a scientific process to the public. We don't have open science systems that would be as beautiful as the kind of systems we have to expose social exchanges. We have beautiful systems for exposing social interactions, but we don't really have such things for exposing science. And I feel like this is part of the reason why the public really doesn't believe or is confused, actually, about things like global warming. Essentially, if you think about the science, is dramatically fragmented. It used to be behind paywalls. Nowadays, it's improving. But still, in my opinion, most of the scientific processes behind walls, reviewing processes behind walls, discussions are behind walls. There is no such a thing as a platform like Facebook, but for exposing scientific process. And I'm wondering whether you think that could be a reason why we are, as a society, we are not getting to solve big problems such as global warming. Thank you.
I think that if I can answer I do see an increase in respect for what is being called citizen science. And so, again, with the bottom-up versus top-down metaphor, that there are efforts at certain types of knowledge and ones that can be gathered by individuals that is exposing the scientific process more broadly. Simultaneously, there's a concern about the kind of vetting and the kind of peer review that is necessary for integrity. And so I think that that tension is partly why some of the things that are behind closed walls remain there because of the fact that completely democratizing input into those kinds of knowledge confuse the structures of validation of knowledge. So I do think that there is much more science that's available to people. Like also my kids, learn about how stuff works a lot easier than I did when I had to look at an outdated encyclopedia with 24 volumes or whatever. And so I think science is more accessible, but I think your question also reveals the problem we have in terms of validation and professionalization of types of knowledge that require training and expertise.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and let's
go
not
ahead,
forget that it was probably more than 2,000 years ago that somebody said there is no royal road to mathematics, right? Okay, and I would like to just briefly come back to the question there about micropayments and that favoring the rich. Well, maybe we should also work on diminishing the income inequality, and then that will go away by itself.
Right. And I mean, one point I took from that last question was, the question, can the web still help foster change in how society works or organizations function? And I don't know, I think during the conversation we've shown that hopefully there still is some potential for that. So maybe we'll solve these questions going forward. We are out of time. Thank you very much to the panelists. Thank you to the audience. Please thank the three of them.
I was asked to make one little announcement as you asked me to point out in the beginning. This is 25 years of the Web Conference. The first one was 24th of May, and CERN, I just learned this today, has discovered all the videos of that conference and is putting them online. So from next week, you will be able to watch them. Also go through... Thank you. It was not my fault at all. Not my work anyway. And also go to the, I think you will put this on the site of the Computer History Museum? Yeah, okay, right. So you can go there too to find out. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we're almost at the end. We will be very happy after that. So we will start with the awards, and the Best Paper Awards were decided by this committee: Elisa Bertino, Deborah Donato, Aristis Jonis, Aaron Iyengar, and Kong Yu. And I will ask Kong to come here and explain the process and also mention which are the awards.
It's my honor to present the Best Paper Awards, and it was a lot of fun. The five of us worked together. It's a lot of work, but we enjoyed it because it's reading some of the best papers from the conference. So I want to just briefly introduce the process we did, and basically the candidates are nominated by the track chairs during our deliberation in Atlanta, and then extensively discuss among the award members over a period of 2 months. Each one of us read all the papers and looked at it. For some of the papers, we invited expert external reviewers to look at it. So without further ado, I'm going to switch to the, which one? Oh, okay. All right, so best short paper. It's Vitor and Learning to Rank Web Pages Based on Visual Features by Bran, Ilya, and Martin. And this is basically, the authors have a very clever way of introducing the best looking web pages and use that features in their Learning to Rank algorithm. So if the authors are around, please. Yes. Congrats. All right, so for the best full paper, we actually had a lot of debate because we really have 2 papers we liked very much as the committee. And one of them is actually a student paper, but we think the student paper is as good as the best paper, so we decided to award them jointly, and the best student paper vacant. So let's do the first one. The first one is Emoji-Powered Representation Learning for Cross-Lingual Sentiment Classification by Zhengpeng Shen and Zinu and Xuan and Chaozhu and Xuanzhe. And the paper talks about basically using the global language that is emoticon and emoji to do translational and global learning of regardless of which language the sentence is in, and basically do sentiment classification that performs much better than the prior state of art. Well, Chaozhu, I think you're the only one still here, so Oh, you're actually all here. Okay, great. Yeah. So I think this is the one. Yeah. Congrats. Oh wow. Okay. Congrats. Thank you. Thank you. Congrats. So the second one is AlGuard detecting in-browser covert cryptocurrency mining in the wild. And this is by Amin, Zane, Paul, Charles, Joshua, Andrew, Nikita, Manos, and Michael. And this paper basically talks about, in a sense, I'll just read that, design, implementation, and evaluation of the first effective defense not requiring manual analysis against in-browser crypto hijacking. Yeah. Would the author come up? Thanks. Congrats. All right, with that, we'll move on to Best Poster Awards. And is the poster award chair here?
Yeah, Reza and Ashton are back.
Oh, all right, cool.
Okay, thank you for the great posters. The posters were selected basically based on your votes. And which one is next? This one? Okay. Before we actually announce the Best Poster Award, we're going to acknowledge, we had some very great posters, so we want to acknowledge these two as honorable mentions. The first one is Yelp actually cleaning up the restaurant industry, a reanalysis and the relative uselessness of consumer reviews by Daniel Ho and Kristen Altenberger. And the second one is Turk Scanner predicting the hourly wage of microtasks. So these are also really good posters, so we had a really hard time distinguishing between these good posters. And the Best Poster Award goes to Demographic Inference and Representative Population Estimates from Multilingual Social Media Data by Zijian Wang, Scott Hale, David Adelani, Przemysław Grabowicz, and Timo Hartman, Fabian Flock, and David Jurgens.
Thank you to Congress for their work. Okay, this is the end of the ending. So we're celebrating the 30 years of the web, also the 25th anniversary of the conference, but also today, by chance, or maybe not, is the World Telecommunication and Information Society Day that started in 2005 in Tunisia. You want to mention about preservation?
Yes, so a note on preservation. A lot of you have been in the web conference or worldwide web conference over the past years. Computer History Museum collects digital and otherwise artifacts of the conference series and other conferences that you're attending, perhaps. So if you're interested, if there are items that you don't want and you want to help the Computer History Museum to preserve this in perpetuity, please contact Mark Weber. His email address is in the bottom of the slides. So like many other great things that happens in the Bay Area around the topic of the web, it all starts with Bibo White. If you don't know Bibo, you should get to know him.
Bibo, stand up.
Bibo, please stand up. On July 11, 2015, Bibo and Yuri Leskowitz sent us an email invitation to discuss International World Wide Web Conference in the Bay Area, dear colleague, and that was the beginning of it. So since then, we have been working together.
And Yuri left because he had to do the one in Ljubljana.
That's true. So we have been working over the past almost 4 years with an amazing group of people who came together and helped us make this conference happen to you. And this is our opportunity to thank all of them for all the work that we have been doing. They have been doing over the past 4 years.
Stand up if you are here, one of them, please.
Shin, I see you. Beginning. So the team came together really to not only make the conference happen, but kind of create a new vision for the conference or an extended vision for the conference. So we put together a proposal which created mainly like 4 focus areas for the conference. One of them was generally creating a theme which is around building an open, inclusive, balanced, and secure web, a web which is for good. And we tried to capture this theme through the keynotes and the 3 special tracks that the team put together, the Web of Health track, the future of the open web, and designing an ethical web. We also try to bridge existing communities. So the teams that worked on these tracks and throughout the different functions of the conference, they try to really think about how we can use the web conference as a platform and venue for bringing not only the computer scientists, computational social scientists who are usually in our field, but how to bring back some of the other people who need to be in the kind of conversations we have. And the special tracks, I want to thank all the chairs in these tracks because they spend a lot of time and thinking for how to make that happen. We opened the doors to a lot of physicians, neurologists, psychiatrists, health policy experts, UN representatives, members of the European Parliament, and artists, NGOs, nonprofits, and there was a lot of work and thought and persistence to make that happen during the conference. We put a lot of effort on diversity, and you can look around and say we should do a lot more, and we all agree with you. But I want to say that through student scholarships, but also as we were forming the team, as we were inviting speakers, as we were taking every step throughout the conference, we took diversity and put it front and center, and we tried to improve things. This is to say that we hope this is something that we all continue doing as a community, as we work with our PhD students, as we work with researchers, as we organize other events. This is no one task for just one group or one conference or one person. And the last thing is that we try to create more direct opportunities for interactions. So making poster sessions specifically as kind of a dedicated component, first-class citizen that you all can go to. If you have an accepted paper, you are going to have a poster, or you are going to have a poster anyway. And that created an opportunity for one-on-one conversations that we heard positive feedback, at least from some of you, that you enjoyed that kind of interaction. And with this?
Well, first, thank you all for coming. Without you, it's impossible to do this.
Yeah, so, go ahead, yeah.
Thank you to all the volunteers.
Yeah, so we put this here thanks to all the families and partners and friends. I mean, this has been a very long process, and it's while every one of us decided to volunteer for this conference, this was not the choice that people around us really made. So they had to make their own sacrifices over the past few years, and thanks to them. Mm-hmm.
So thank you again. This is a sample of the people that came to the conference, because we had many more than almost 1,700. So I don't know what they were doing during the picture.
Yeah, and thank you to our sponsors. So the conference would not happen without the participation of all of you who come here and also our sponsors. We want to specifically call out all the sponsors who helped make this conference possible. Microsoft at Diamond level, Amazon, Bloomberg Engineering, Google, Criteo AI Labs, Cisco, Intent, Spotify, Yahoo Research, Wikimedia Foundation at silver level.
Bronze level, Baidu, Didi, eBay, Facebook, LinkedIn, Megagon Labs, Mix, Mozilla, Netflix Research, Northeastern University, Pinterest, Quora, Visa Research, and Wallman Labs. And others included Airbnb, Let Go, More Foundation, and Webcaster. So thank you for coming. And now we can give the testimony to the next conference. We are done.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Yenan Huang from Academia Sinica in Taiwan.
And this is Erwin King from the Chinese University of Hong Kong. It's like passing the baton, right?
Right.
That's right.
And this will be the first Worldwide Web conference in Taiwan and Taipei. So I'm going to give you a few minutes. I'm going to give you some, for those of you who may not know where Taiwan is and what to do in Taiwan. Well, I'm going to give you some information about Taiwan. And so, can you bring up the slides? Yeah. Oh, I have this one. Sorry. Okay, the green button. Okay, trying to get it. 1 second. Okay. No. So this is this is a city view of Taipei. The building there was, it was the tallest building worldwide for about many years. The conference is next to this 101 building. So you have a very nice, view of the Taipei city and a lot of activities nearby. And there's a lot of good food and a lot of good activities, good nightclubs and so on. So you would not only have a good papers there, but you have a lot of fun there too. And there's some important days for your reference. Of course, we're going to have early bird. The conference will be in April 20 to 24th. Okay, so then the early bird registration will be on the February 20th. So please remember this date. Then there will be a number of like in the past, there will be an abstract due date and also the full paper submission due date, and there will be notification date will be on the January 10th. So you have plenty of time to do the final version also. In Taiwan, actually, many countries, you can come to Taiwan without any visa, but there was some you may need visa, but we can help you to get the visa done, okay? Again, there's a lot of activities in Taiwan which you can do, including a lot of culture activity. There's a lot of, good place to do hiking. We also have beautiful beaches not far away from the conference site. And it's very convenient. If you're going to fly to Taipei, there are many direct flights from all over the world, from Europe, from US. Taipei is about, southeast of Asia, of China, the Asia, which is, 3 hours from Japan. Again, Hong Kong is 1.5 hours. To here, San Francisco, the average flight time is about 11 hours. So they're all direct flight. And from Europe, from Paris, maybe 13 hours. So it's not too far away in that sense. And also, like the weather-wise, it will be, temperature will be nice. I think it will be probably warmer than this. Hopefully not going to get any rain. It's close to the rainy season, so you may need to bring your umbrella. But, Taipei City is very convenient by a lot of transportation, metro, also the taxi. Taxi is very cheap, okay? $5 can go almost everywhere in Taipei City. So it's very convenient and very cheap. We do have, you can go to YouTube and just search Taipei or Taiwan, and they'll give you a lot of video to show what can you do in Taipei. But I do prepare a very short video, a 1-minute video. Can you play the video?
The best travels are about tastes.
Really, really good, actually.
The flavors that spell diversity. Ignites senses and fuels desires.
Oh my gosh.
cuisines steeped in tradition, yet infused with modern touches and street flair. Providing an opportunity to savor.
So good. Super set up.
Bond and immerse in a gastronomic adventure.
It's my food happy dance.
Taiwan, not just a destination, it's an experience.
Okay, I hope I will see you all in Taipei, not just to have good papers, but also have a lot of fun. Okay, thank you.
You want me to say something?
Okay, yeah. About the program that Elvin.
He was a little too excited. He forgot to give me a few words. I just want to say this. We started actually the celebration of the 30th anniversary of the web. We will end the celebration of the 30th anniversary of the web in Taiwan. So come join with me and us in Taiwan in celebration of that. But I think there are two people that we really need to thank. I know they thanked so many people, but nobody actually really thanked them. So let's officially really thank Rick and Layla for all their work.
Okay. Okay. So again, hope to see you all in Taipei. And okay, thank you. Thank you.